Hare Krishna, my friends. Welcome to our Friday night reading of Sri Brahma Samhita. In last week's reading, we learned about the 64 arts of Srimati Radharani. Such talent and such variety, amazing. Her talents range from composing poetry to engineering to makeup to making toys with flowers. It just amazing range. The discussion then turned to manifest and unmanifest pastimes and the qualifications of the devotee to see and understand them. We had to stop in the middle of that purport as we ran out of time, so we'll continue with that today. And in fact, it's such a long purport, that's probably all we're going to read tonight, is just the conclusion of that purport. So we're on page 61 of the PDF. Continuing text 37. But, as usual, before we continue, Bhaktathor says, okay, good to me, excellent. Before we continue, let's offer our obeisances to Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane. I offer my respectful obeisances unto His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who is very dear to Lord Krishna, having taken shelter at his lotus feet. And please accept my obeisances. I feel very privileged to be here with you and read and record this. Vanchakalpa tarubhyascha kripasindubhye cha patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. I also offer my respectful obeisances unto the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. They are just like desire trees and can fulfill the desires of everyone. They are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. So that's you. You guys are the people full of compassion, just like desire trees. All right, so what did I say? Text 37, page 61 of the PDF is where we are. And I'm going to back up a little bit so that there's some continuity. So let's go to the page just before that and read that last paragraph because it's a good tie into what we read last week and what we're going to read this week. All right? So here we go. There are some who, let me read the verse, the English translation of this verse before we get going. So the translation of this verse, 37, is, I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, residing in his own realm, Goloka, with Radha, resembling his own spiritual figure, the embodiment of the ecstatic potency possessed of the 64 artistic activities in the company of her confidants, her Sakhis, embodiments of the extensions of her bodily form, permeated and vitalized by his ever blissful spiritual rasa. All right, so then we did all the 64 arts. And it's funny, during the week I thought about tragus. Remember, there is one of her things is Karnapatra Bhanga, the art of decorating the tragus of the ear. That's that little flap that goes from your cheek right to your ear, that little piece. So it came every once in a while during the week. I'd scratch my ear and it's like, oh, she's expert at decorating that. So that kind of stuff we can remember. All right, so here we go. Page 60 on just that last paragraph. There are some who, being unable to understand the drift of his statements, of Jiva Goswami, give meanings of their own invention and indulge in useless controversies. Sri Rupa and Sanatana say that there is no real and essential distinction between the Leelas visible and non-visible. The only distinction lies in this, that one is manifest in the mundane sphere, whereas the other is not so. In the supramundane manifestation, in the spiritual realm, there is absolute purity in the seer and the seen. A particularly fortunate person, when he is favored by Krishna, can shake off worldly shackles and connections, enter the transcendental region after attaining the realized taste of the varieties of rasa that is available during the period of novitiate. Only such a person can have a view and taste of the perfect and absolutely pure Leela of Goloka. Such receptive natures are rarely found. He who exists in the mundane sphere can also realize the taste of Chid Rasa by the grace of Krishna, by being enabled to attain the realized state of service. Such a person can have a view of the pastimes of Goloka manifested in the maintained Leela of Gokula. So let me just stop for a moment. So he's speaking of two different groups of people, those who have left their, he says, shake off worldly shackles and connections, and they reside now in the transcendental realm. And then there are those of us who are still here working on it. So there are two different groups. And then there's Goloka and Gokula. So Loka means planet. This is the way I remember it. Loka is planet. So Goloka is the planet of the cows, right? Goloka. So that's Krishna's transcendental planet, Goloka. And Gokula is what's here, the pastimes that he performs here on this planet or on other planets. So he calls it the mundane sphere. So that's wherever those pastimes are happening, that's called Gokula. All right, so we've got the two people and the two places. Okay, all right, just want to clarify all that. So he says, such a person can have a view of the pastimes of Goloka manifested in the mundane Leela of Gokula. So there is certainly a difference between these two classes of eligible seekers of the truth. Until one attains the perfectly transcendental stage, he must be hampered by his lingering limitations in his vision of the pastimes of Goloka. Again, the vision of the transcendental reality varies according to the degree of self-realization. The vision of Goloka must also vary accordingly. Bhaktivinoda says, yes, I am still remembering Loka. So it's good to remember, to kind of go over those words, because especially in this context, he uses them in such a facile way, quickly back and forth between the two. So let's continue with the reading here. It is only those fettered souls who are excessively addicted to worldliness that are devoid of the devotional eye. Of them, some are enmeshed by the variegatedness of the deluding energy, while others aspire after self-annihilation under the influence of centrifugal knowledge. So I had to look up centrifugal because it just didn't sound right to me. So centrifugal means moving or tending to move away from the center. So knowledge that's going to take you away from Krishna. So that's what he's referring to, centrifugal knowledge. Just an interesting way to say it. All right, back to the text. Though they might have a view of the mundanely manifested pastimes of the Supreme Lord, they can have only a material conception of those visible pastimes, this conception being devoid of transcendental reality. Hence, the realization of Goloka appears in proportion to eligibility due to the degree of one's self-realization. This is key to what he says in the next couple of pages, this proportion of eligibility due to the degree of one's self-realization. So keep that in mind. The underlying principle is this, that though Gokula here is as holy and free from dross or trash as Goloka, Still, it is manifested on the mundane plane by the influence of the Chit potency, Yogamaya. In visible and non-visible matters of transcendental regions, there is no impurity, contamination, or imperfection inherent in the world of limitation. Only there is some difference in the matter of realization in proportion to the self-realization of the seekers after the Absolute. Impurity, unwholesomeness, foreign elements, illusion, nescience, unholiness, utter inadequacy, insignificance, grossness, these appertain to the I, intellect, mind, and ego, stultified by the material nature of conditioned souls. They have nothing to do with the essential nature of transcendence. The more one is free from these blots, the more is one capable of realizing the unqualified Absolute. The truth, who has been revealed by the scriptures, is free from dross, but the realizations of the seekers of the knowledge of these realities are with or without flaw in accordance with the degree of their individual realization. Those 64 arts that have been enumerated above do in reality exist unstintedly only in Goloka. There, Goloka. Unwholesomeness, insignificance, grossness are found in those arts in the accordance with the degree of self-realization on the part of the aspirants after the knowledge of the Absolute. So if you see some problem with it, it's the mote is in your eye, right? Not in it. According to Srila Rupa and Srila Sanatana, all those pastimes that have been visible in Gokula here exist in all purity and free from all tinge of limitation in Goloka there. So transcendental autocratic paramourship also exists in Goloka in inconceivable purity, judged by the same standard and reasoning. All manifestation by the Chit potency Yogamaya are pure. So as the above paramourship is the creation of Yogamaya, it is necessarily free from all contamination and appertains to the absolute reality. So I'm going to stop for a second and tell a story, because this is going to get into the whole idea of Krishna being with all these thousands of women. So there was actually in Calcutta, probably during the time of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who wrote this book, there was a court case about Krishna and all of his wives and how it was immoral. Of course, the British were in charge then, right? And so it went to the court and they argued both sides, and it was decided that this particular view that we're reading about here in Brahma Samhita, that all of it is pure and that it's our looking at it that causes it to be impure, and it was thrown out. I also heard another, and I don't know if this one's true, but I have read about the court case. But then I did hear this one. I didn't read this one about the Christians were saying, "Oh, Krishna has all of these wives and all these lovers, and that's really immoral." And the judge was like, "Well, it's my understanding that all of the nuns that you have in your church are all married to God. So in your church too, God has lots of wives." So that's just, I don't know if that's a joke or if it actually happened, but it's something. Bhakti says, great answer. So yeah, I don't know about if that was true, but it's a great response to that issue. Anyway, let us continue. Let us pause to consider what the absolute reality is in himself. Sri Rupa Goswami says, Purvokta Sarataha. In regard to these shlokas, Sri Jiva Goswami, after mature deliberation, has established the transcendental paramorship as the Brahma Vilasa, something seemingly different from what it appears to be. Such are the pastimes of birth, etc., accomplished by Yogamaya. So Vibrahma Vilasa means divine delusions or deceptive pastimes. So it's something that would be, as he says, accomplished by Yogamaya. And I couldn't find the source of a lot of the verses that are cited here in the next couple of pages. So I apologize, but I tried. Referenced, yeah, I couldn't. Yeah, I think he's trying to find me the right word as I'm stumbling around for it. Referenced, yes. All right, let me continue. By the explanation, Tatapi Brajvanitanam, Srila Jiva Goswami has expressed his profound implication. Joyous pastimes by the meeting of seeming error, the Brahma Vilasa, as the contrivance of Yogamaya, has also been admitted in the concluding statements of Rupa and Sanatana. Still, since Sripad Jiva Goswami has established the identity of Goloka with Gokula, it must be admitted that there is transcendental reality underlying all the pastimes of Gokula that happen here. A husband is one who binds oneself in wedlock with a girl, while a paramour is one who, in order to win another's wife's love by means of love, crosses the conventions of morality by the impulse of the sentiment that regards her love as the be-all and end-all of existence. In Goloka, there is no such function at all as that of the nuptial relationship. Hence, there is no husbandhood characterized by such connection. On the other hand, since the gopis, who are self-supported real entities, are not tied to anybody else in wedlock, they cannot also have the state of concubinage. Concubinage? As a concubine. There can also be no separate entities in the forms of svakiya, conjugal, and parakiya, adulterous or romantic states. In the visible pastimes on the mundane plane, the function in the form of the nuptial relationship is found to exist here where we live. Krishna is beyond the scope of that function. Hence, the said function of the circle of all love is contrived by Yogamaya. Krishna tastes the transcendental rasa akin to paramorship by overstepping that function. This pastime of going beyond the pale of the apparent moral function manifested by Yogamaya is, however, also observable only on the mundane plane by the eye that is enwrapped by the mundane covering. But there is really no such levity in the pastimes of Krishna. The rasa of paramorship is certainly the extracted essence of all the rasas. If it be said that it does not exist in Goloka, it would be highly deprecatory to Goloka. It is not the fact that there is no supremely wholesome tasting of rasa in the supremely excellent realm of Goloka. Krishna, the fountainhead of all avatars, tastes the same in a distinct form in Goloka and in another distinct form in Gokula. Therefore, in spite of the seeming appearance to the mundane eye, the outstepping the bounds of legitimate function by the form of paramorship, there must be present the truth of it in some form even in Goloka. Atmaramo pya ariramat atmanya avaruddha saurata. Reme Raj Sundari Bir Yatar Baka, Pratibemba Vibrahma. And it translates, I was able to get a translation for this. So even though he delights only in the self, and his pleasure is contained entirely within himself, he took pleasure with the beautiful women of Braj, just as a child plays with his own reflections. So this and other texts of the scriptures go to show that self-delightedness is the essential distinctive quality of Krishna himself. Krishna, in his majestic Chit realm, causes the manifestation of his own Chit potency as Lakshmi and enjoys her as his own wedded consort. As this feeling of wedded consorthood preponderates there, rasa expands in a wholesome form only up to the state of servanthood, dasya rasa. But in Goloka, he divides up his chit potency into thousands of gopis and eternally engages in amorous pastimes with them by forgetting the sentiments of ownership. By the sentiments of ownership, there cannot be the extreme inaccessibility of the rasa. So the gopis have naturally from eternity the innate sentiment of being others' wedded wives. Krishna, too, in response to that sentiment, by assuming the reciprocal sentiment of paramourship, performs the rasa and other amorous pastimes with the aid of the flute, his favorite Sharami, dear friend. Goloka is the transcendental seat of eternally self-realized rasa, beyond limited conception. Hence, in Goloka, there is realization of the sentimental assumption of the rasa of paramourship. Again, such is the nature of the principle of the majesty that in the realm of Vaikuntha, before Goloka, there is no rasa of parental affection towards the source of all avatars. But in Goloka, the seat of all super excellent deliciousness, there is no more than the original sentimental, egoistic assumption of the same rasa. There, Nanda and Yashoda are visibly present, but there is no occurrence of birth. For want of the occurrence of birth, the assumed egoistic sentiment of parental affection of Nanda and Yashoda has no foundation in the actual existence of such entities as father and mother, but it is of the nature of sentimental assumption on their parts. See Jayati Jana Nivaso Devaki Janmavada. And that's a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto, chapter 90, verse 48, and the full translation of that, which is really sweet. Lord Shri Krishna is he who is known as Jananivasa, the ultimate resort of all living entities, and he was also known as Devaki Nandana or Yashoda Nandana, the son of Devaki and Yashoda. He is the guide of the Yadu dynasty, and with his mighty arms he kills everything inauspicious, as well as every man who is impious. But by his presence, he destroys all things inauspicious for all living entities, moving and inert. His blissful, smiling face always increases the lusty desires of the gopis of Vrindavan. May he be all glorious and happy. Hey, Bhaktathor, I think we just read that verse recently in Bhagavad Arkamarichi Mala. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? He says, oh, maybe. All right, let me continue. For the purpose of the realization of the rasa, the assumed egoistic sentiment is, however, eternal. In the rasa of amorous love, if the corresponding egoistic sentiments of concubinage and paramourship be mere eternal assumptions. There is nothing to blame in them, and it also does not go against the scriptures. When those transcendental entities of Goloka becomes manifest in Braj, then those two egoistic sentiments become somewhat more palpable to the mundane view in the phenomenal world, and there comes to be this much difference only. In the rasa of parental affection, the sentiments of Nanda and Yashoda, that they are parents, becomes manifest in the more tangible form in the pastimes of birth, etc. And in the amorous rasa, the corresponding sentiments of concubinage in the respective gopis become manifest in the forms of their marriages with Abhimanyu, Govardhan, etc. In reality, there is no such separate entity as husbandhood of the gopis, either in Goloka or in Gokula. Hence, the Shastras declare that there is no sexual union of the gopis with their husbands. It is also for the same reason that the authorized teacher of the principle of rasa, Sri Rupa, writes that in the transcendental amorous rasa, the hero is of two different types, namely the wedded husband and the paramour. Patis chopa patis cheti prabbedav iha, oh boy, I'm messing that, vishrutav iti. Sri Jiva, I couldn't find a translation for that. So Sri Jiva, in his commentary by his words, acknowledges the eternal paramourship of Krishna in Goloka and Gokula, and the husbandhood of Krishna in Vaikuntha and Dwarka, etc. In the Lord of Goloka, there, and the Lord of Gokula here, the character of paramourship is found in its complete form. Krishna's deliberate overstepping of his own quality of self-delightedness is caused by the desire of union with another's wedded wife. The state of being another's wedded wife is nothing but the corresponding assumed sentiment on the part of the gopis. In reality, they have no husbands with independent and separate existence. Still, their very egoistic sentiment makes them have the nature of the wedded wives of others. So all the characteristics, namely that, quote, desire makes the paramour overstep the bounds of duty, end quote, etc., are eternally present in the seat of all deliciousness. In Braj, that very thing reveals itself to an extent in a form more tangible to persons with mundane eyes. So in Goloka, there is inconceivable distinction and non-distinction between the rasas analogous to mundane concubineship and wifehood. It may be said with equal truth that there is no distinction in Goloka between the two, as also that there is such distinction. The essence of paramourship is the cessation of ownership, and the abeyance of ownership is the enjoyment of his own chit potency in the shape of abeyance of paramourship or enjoyment without the sanction of wedlock. The conjunction of the two exists there as one rasa, accommodating both varieties. In Gokula, it is really the same, with the difference that it produces a different impression on observers belonging to the mundane plane. So remember, we've got those two different types of people, right? So in Govinda, the hero of Goloka, there exists both husbandhood and paramourship, above all piety and impiety, and free from all grossness. Such is also the case with the hero of Gokula, although there is a distinction in realization caused by Yoga Maya. If it be urged that what is manifested by Yoga Maya is the highest truth, being the creation of the chit potency, and that, therefore, the impression of paramourship is also really true, the reply is that there may exist an impression of analogous sentimental egoism, and the tasting of rasa free from any offense, because it is not without a basis in truth. But the unwholesome impression that is produced in the mundane judgment is offensive, and as such cannot exist in the pure chit realm. In fact, Sripad Jiva Goswami has come to the true conclusion, and at the same time, the finding of the opposing party is also inconceivably true. It is the vain empirical wranglings about wedded wifehood and concubinage which is false and full of specious verbosity. He who goes through the commentaries of Sripad Jiva Goswami and those of the opposing party with an impartial judgment cannot maintain his attitude of protest engendered by any real doubt. What the unalloyed devotee of the Supreme Lord says is all true and is independent of any consideration of unwholesome pros and cons. There is, however, the element of mystery in their verbal controversies. Those whose judgment is made of mundane stuff, being unable to enter into the spirit of the all-loving controversies among pure devotees, due to their own want of unalloyed devotion, are apt to impute to the devotees their own defects of partisanship and opposing views. Commenting on the shloka of Rasa Panchadhyaya, Gopinam Tat Patinam Cha, etc., what Sripad Sanatana Goswami has stated conclusively in his Vaishnava Toshani has been accepted with reverence by the true devotee, Sripad Vishwanath Chakravarti, without any protest. So if you are curious, you can look for a copy of Vaishnava Toshani. There's an English translation out there, but know that these are all very, very thick philosophical treatises, and whenever I read them, I take copious notes so that I can refer back to all of their arguments about this thing or that thing. Anyway, let me continue. Bhakta Thor says, this is overwhelming. It is overwhelming. It is, but it's, we're almost done. So I'll say something when we get to the end. So whenever he says to follow it is like impossible. Yeah. Yeah, you have, like when I take notes on a very large sheet of paper. And so when the argument bifurcates, goes into two different directions, then I draw lines and then take notes on the one side and then take notes on the other side, and then draw arrows from the original argument down to the next thing. So that's what's going on here, is he's explaining something and it breaks into two things, and he talks about the two things, but then he goes back to the original point he was making, and he does that toward the end, but he keeps splitting and splitting and splitting, so it becomes really difficult to follow. I've actually found this method of taking notes really helpful on a very large sheet of paper with lots of arrows and lines and stuff. It really is helpful. Bhakta Thor says, I'm too lazy. That's funny. All right, let me continue. Whenever any dispute arises regarding the pure cognitive pastimes, such as Goloka, up there, etc., we would do well to remember the precious advice from the holy lips of Srimad Mahaprabhu and his associates, the Goswamis, namely, that the truth absolute is ever characterized by spiritual variegatedness that transcends the variegatedness of mundane phenomena. So it's transcendental to whatever variegatedness we have here. But he, capital He, is never featureless, which is a big part of Gaudiya philosophy, right? He's never featureless. The divine rasa is lovely, with the variegatedness of the fourfold distinction of vibhava, anubhava, sattvika, and vyabhichari, and the rasa is ever present in Goloka and Vaikuntha. The rasa of Goloka manifests as Braj rasa on the mundane plane for the benefit of the devotees by the power of Yogamaya. So they make it manifest and available to us. Whatever is observable in Gokula Rasa here should be visible in Goloka Rasa in a clearly explicit form. Hence, the distinction of paramourship and concubinage, the variegatedness of the respective rasas of all different persons, the soil, the water, river, hill, portico, bower, cows, etc., all the features of Gokula exist in Goloka, disposed in an appropriate manner. There is only this peculiarity that the mundane conceptions of human beings possessed of material judgment regarding those transcendental entities, they do not exist there. The conception of Goloka up there manifests itself differently in proportion to the degree of realization of the various pastimes of Braj. And it is very difficult to lay down any definite criterion as to which portions are mundane and which are uncontaminated. The more the eye of devotion is tinged with the salve of love, the more will the transcendental concept gradually manifest itself. I have always liked that phrase, the eye of devotion tinged with the salve of love. I've always loved that phrase. Anyway, Bhakta Thor says, yes, that is nice. So there is no need for further hypothetical speculation, which does not improve one's spiritual appreciation, as the substantive knowledge of Goloka is an inconceivable entity. To try to pursue the inconceivable by the conceptual process is like pounding the empty husk of grain, which is sure to have a fruitless ending. Right? There's nothing there. It is, therefore, one's bounden duty, by refraining from the endeavor to know, to try to gain the experience of the transcendental by the practice of pure devotion. Any course, the adoption of which tends to produce the impression of featurelessness, must be shunned by all means. Unalloyed parakya rasa, free from all mundane conception, is a most rare attainment. It is this which has been described in the narrative of the pastimes of Gokula. Those devotees who follow the dictate of their pure spontaneous love should base their devotional endeavors on that narrative. They will attain to the more wholesome fundamental principle on reaching the stage of realization. The devotional activities characterized by illicit amour, as practiced by worldly-minded conditioned souls, are forbidden mundane impiety. The heart of our apostle Sripad Jiva Goswami was very much moved by such practices and induced him to give us his conclusive statements on the subject. It is the duty of a pure Vaishnava to accept the real spirit of his statements. It is a great offense to disrespect the Acharya and to seek to establish a different doctrine in opposition to him. So that's the end of the purport of text 37. It's very long, but very incredible. And as Bhakti Thor said, it is almost impossible to follow what was going on here. But he kind of wrapped it up there at the end. We can see a manifestation of Goloka by that salve. What was it? The eye of devotion is tinged with the salve of love. So the more we engage ourselves in devotional service, be it either Vaidhi Bhakti, following the regulative principles, chanting your rounds, reading, singing, offering arti, all those things, or as spontaneously in Raganuga Bhakti, all of those things are there to clear away that miasma, that fog that's there in front of us, so that we can see this more clearly. And at the beginning of what we read today, there's the people who are already there, right? Who, excuse me, who are already there are pure, and they see everything very clearly. But then there's those of us who are still here. We can see it as we become more and more pure in really realizing who Krishna is and our relationship to Krishna. We will see more and more, and these long tomes of philosophy will become like nectar as we read them. Bhaktathora says, this condemns all sects in any fashion, even spiritual. Excuse me. I'm not sure that it does. I think that it's saying that the objection in the mundane world is that Krishna was having dalliances with married women, but that in the spiritual realm, there is no such thing as a married woman. It's pure in the loka, he says. Yes, there are no married women. They think they're married, but there is no nuptial relationship in Goloka. There aren't husbands wandering around. So, but anyway, and he says here at the end that it's incumbent on us to immerse ourselves in this process, in this ocean of bhakti, and to become purified. Bhaktathora says, well, thank you. This is the most technical book we have read. Yes, it is the most technical book we've read, although we were getting into some technical stuff in the Bhagavatam, which is why I thought we would take a little break, but it became a different kind of technical, didn't it? So, but it's been quite glorious. I've really appreciated reading this book. So we're on page 65. On text 38, we'll stop next time. He says yes, he agrees. We'll continue next time, but it looks like we're about a third of the way through. Bhaktathor says, I think sometimes we can see what he is talking about. Yes, exactly, and that's the point. That's the point. That's why the Goswamis write all this stuff, so that we have some glimpse of it, that we can identify with it. We can think about it. We can, and things will kind of pop up, even if it's just the part of your earlobe. Things will come up during the week. I think this eye of devotion tinged with a salve of love might be mine this week. Bhakta Mimula says, find your own star. Yes. So see what carries you through. And again, and I've been harping on this for the past couple of weeks, looking at the moon through the branches of the tree. That's what this is. They're describing all these things so that we can sort of see, yeah, oh yeah, it's kind of up there. So more and more, the Goswamis are describing all of these things. And in their time, there were lots of Mayavadis and lots of people condemning the Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy. So they had to go through word for word, even breaking up the words into their root forms, to argue these different points in our philosophy, right? Now we're not so familiar with all of those things, but that's a lot of what they did. And Jiva Goswami especially, like when I was a kid, we used to talk about splitting hairs. Boy, all of Jiva Goswami's work is all hair splitting, just so. But it's fascinating to me. It's really fascinating. Anyway, my friends, thank you again for letting me read. Thank you to Srila Prabhupada for bringing this to the West. Thank you, Bhakta Thor, for having us here in Bhaktiville. And thank you, dear listeners, for letting us read with you. Have a great week. Thank you. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.